So to start, I always think it's important that you know who's on the panel so that you know who you're speaking with. So we're just going to begin with the formalities. I think you all know me by now, Patty Lyon, head of upper school and director of academics. And I think we'll start, Carol, if you don't mind, with you, and we'll work our way down.
Carol Crane, 7th grade cultural history and English teacher and 7th grade team leader.
I'm Mark Ford. I work on curriculum development.
Megan Hillen, I teach 3rd grade.
Alicia Scordine, 4th grade team leader and cultural history coordinator for the lower school.
Jeanette Tyndall, head of the lower school.
Jennifer Cross, a chair of visual arts, or dean, I should say. Sorry.
Matthew Aldridge, I'm the 10th grade cultural history teacher and co-team leader.
Dave Morgan, Dean of Science and Director of the Innovation Lab Academy.
And Carrie Clark, 12th grade history and Dean of the Cultural History Department.
So what's important for you to note about the panel, just to kind of frame the context of this, is we have people representing different age groups in different disciplines, and that was really important for our panel discussion today, not to just have every team come up independently and speak, but to do some synthesis as well. So that's in part what we're going to be sharing with you today. I'd like to begin framing the conversation by having Mark Ford talk about how we actually began our work around looking more strategically and more focused on the idea of our sustainability thread. And I will say, AKA to be changed in name. We don't know what, so please excuse our reference to it in that way, but we know that it needs a critical update that way.
Yes, correct. I think when we went through this process, I think there's multiple iterations that have happened, but most formally, I think in this week, what we have done is, well, in the past year, and even, I guess, the past 20 years, we've been looking at the curriculum, but the past year, we've been kind of looking at it in the framework of using the HistoMap as a tool to try to find those moments where certain things happen and certain things we can emphasize or where we're missing holes or gaps or whatever to show what a rich curriculum this is. What we did with this is that we had overlays that appear, and we have one over here, which we can, Matt and
Can we do a
Carrie.
Vanna moment, please?
Dave.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this, no, leave it up so we can talk about it. So, right. Well, this is, if you, the idea, we're talking about the initial idea. So what we did is we met together in teams, and throughout the week, we met together in teams, and some of us know some about the sustainability thread, but I think a lot of us were educated in ways that we didn't imagine, I guess, as the week went on. But on this map, it was originally a white blank map. This is vellum paper that you can actually place on top of the original HistoMap. So they had the original HistoMaps that have the actual, a listing of the learning experiences and integrated projects that occur in that grade. And so we started talking about ideas around sustainability as we were learning from the speakers. From that, so you actually, if you can, you don't need to be able to read each of those, but there's handwritten, pencil-written material. Well, okay. So, actually, honestly, some of the pencil writing I can't really read. That's most of the conversation. But we could say here, for example, we were talking about here how the encyclopedia project is
about the Enlightenment.
Right. And results in classification, which then, from classification, then you start leading to collection. And we tied it into, actually later on, this possibility of a new IP looking at the destruction of the Great Auk, where collection turns into extinction. Other things as well. But we're trying to find not only where sustainability actually, the issues of sustainability actually occur, but the rationale behind it, and trying to figure out from there. So what these arrows are starting to become are, after our talks, there's some possibilities. I mean, the possibility, we hadn't talked about other things such as sound pollution. What does that look like? So that's something that's there that we may deal with, may not. There's certain things that are there. But we were trying to figure out what is where does this connect not only within this grade, but where does it connect before and afterwards? So there's the idea is trying to, from here, trying to find those moments that actually connect. So the ideal would be is this is digitized. We could actually have overlays, but then you'd have 13 overlays, which is kind of bizarre out there. But when this is digitized, you could actually go to this actual thread and have the thread description of whatever we're going to call sustainability. And you would have the description here. The narrative of explaining this grade would actually perhaps appear here, but also in the larger context. And so the idea is to find those moments that it actually appears. And I think what the nice thing about it as well is it's not only calling out the richness of the curriculum as it is, but it's looking at the old curriculum in new ways, and it's also looking at new possibilities. And I think that's, I really like the idea, the concept of the thread to keep, or adding threads to keep the curriculum dynamic. And I think that's a really, and I think that's, you guys, and I think as a process, if we're going through this process, it wasn't always lockstep. We're going this, you know, a lot of discussion, a lot of conversation came around this. But ultimately, it's not just simply that we have occurrences, but we have occurrences with rationale. And that creates the narrative, and that creates the thread. And so that's where we are. What I guess the next steps for this will be taking these handwritten, turning it into a discussion of larger things and making sure that those fit. And then also, I mean, you can start to see these larger areas where particularly this was actually working with 9th grade, but where 9th grade is actually working, but then you can keep moving it out and you can see this longer thread that establishes. So is this grade 10? This is grade 10 right here.
So the purpose of this part was to frame our discussion so you understood. And for those of you who maybe have not been in the histomap room yet in its entirety, please go there. What we asked each of the teachers to do is they looked at the histomap for the time frame that they teach or the grade level that they teach, because we teach prehistory as well, and really thinking about an overlay of a sustainability thread on top of that. Like, what is called out? What is amplified? And in terms of framing the discussion for each one of the team work times, and in particular the last 2 days, is, and this is very important to our esteemed guests that I would like to point out, it's your conversations that helped us to reimagine how we are looking at our own curriculum. And I think that's really important, and it kind of puts everybody in a different reframing type of process. Is how are we amplifying the ideas associated with sustainability? What are those ideas that we're amplifying? And what might it look like in the classroom? So we were working across many different levels this week on a conceptual framework. And so for each of the grade levels, we now have these ideas articulated in this format that we'll now have to go back and continue to refine and continue to document and collect information around it as we teach it so we can continue to build or amplify this thread of importance for us. Yep. And that's our focus for this year. Right. And today's an important day to share our beginning thoughts, and I invite you all, as the Director of Academics now, I'll put that hat on, to stay engaged with us, because that's going to be very important for questioning and feedback throughout this process.
I think the other thing that was interesting in this process, which I neglected to mention, but one of the steps we did this time too is we looked from domains across grade levels, and I think that's interesting too, because you're going to start to see if there's particular specialties in each domain, they're going to start seeing patterns develop. And again, it's not, there is no, it's a messy process, but that's fine. I mean, on some level, and I think that but one of the things that I've become more and more impressed with this curriculum, and spending more and more time with this curriculum, is it's not just one moment at one time, or one period at one time you're telling the story, but you're telling the whole story all the time. And it becomes more and more clear as you're doing this that when you're actually dealing with something, you're dealing with what has been taught before and what will come afterwards, and it makes the richness that much more apparent. And so,
can I echo what Mark just said, and something Matt said at a meeting yesterday also, is it is messy work, but it wasn't difficult work, because the reason it's messy is because there's so much there. I didn't see any kind of conversation, and I worked both with domains and with teams through this process, where we could kind of stare at the curriculum and went, oh, how do we stick some sustainability in here?
No,
because the way we teach history ties humans very closely with their environment, because the way we teach science teaches the environment very closely to culture. It's all in there. And as someone said before, it's just a matter of kind of amplifying, intensifying, and making those connections explicit. And that's, I think, what the kind of messy part of it is, because there's so many connections to be made.
Yeah.
The task of winnowing that down to a coherent story and a coherent narrative is a sort of intellectual challenge and a big job. But the raw material is there in abundance, and I think that's what kind of going through with the science faculty and going through with the 9th grade faculty is kind of reassuring that yes, this is all in there, and it's just our job to make sure that we can focus our lens on one of these at a time and tell a coherent story with it.
Thank you, Dave. So we're going to move now. When we thought about how do we present this work to all of you, and Mrs. Ross has taught us a lot about pre-production, production, post-production. Not that I've become completely skilled in it, but part of what we were thinking about is we wanted to give you that framework to understand where we began our playing. And making curriculum is about playing with ideas and thinking about how to transmit ideas to various audiences. And the audiences that we are thinking about in all cases are students in the classroom before us, from ages early childhood, 2-year-olds, all the way up to 18 and 19-year-olds. And then also a very important component that came into our conversation this week as well on 2 levels is educating ourselves as educators, which is part of this process, and educating the parents of the children that we're educating as well to the best of our ability. And that helps to frame this as well. I'm going to ask Jen Cross, and those of you who don't know Jen Cross well, is a woman who oftentimes listens patiently and is able to give clarity to a conversation. And yesterday at a certain point, I had lost my ability to be clear, and Jen came in at the right moment and saved the day. And I'm wondering, Jen, if you can recapitulate for me, if you can say exactly, you helped frame it for everyone to think about the task at hand and putting it into the right lens.
Well, I'm not sure I can remember what I said, but I think what I was saying, and it's actually what Dave was saying, is that our curriculum is very rich and dense, and there's more than enough points to spend time on looking at this thread of sustainability. And what I felt was important is that if we are to get our students to look at current events and a modern day crisis, and to really understand it, to make those links back to what we're teaching in the history of humankind, basically, and that will help frame for them why we are where we are. And that was basically it. So I think our job is to teach about the past, but we have to have them see the relevance to current events, the relevance to the crisis that we're in order to maybe raise their awareness, and they're going to be the ones that are going to have the influence in the future to make some changes, even particularly I think our student body, because I think they will be influential people in the future, going back to their countries that they're from. So so that's basically what I was saying, that our task is to help them understand where we are today and how we got there.
So putting it into historical perspective, yep, and done as eloquently as you did yesterday. So we're going to shift gears, and we're going to go into the synthesis phase. And we can go down and drill in the question part to more, to a finer grain size. But we want to help you understand and what we're thinking as a whole school as we look at the sustainability thread and where the connections are between the various periods studied. And we're going to try very hard not to go to saying grade K, grade 2, but to help you look at it from the historical framework in which we teach. So Jeanette, you're going to take over from here to start our synthesis.
I'd like to thank you, Courtney, for this week and for our guests who've come. It's been an incredibly inspiring week. I have to say, I felt it's been one of the most productive weeks we've had here as a faculty, getting together and coming together in a unified way to look at this important topic. And as many people have said, fairly tangible and easy topic to get our heads around. Of course, we've got to think from the perspective of the little ones and how we scaffold some of that information to them. But as Dr. Koizumi so well pointed out the other day, there's nothing that's going to stop young children from coming up with wonderful ideas and making these connections. You know, we worry sometimes, I think, too much about little ones, and actually they're there and they're going to help us with some of these big ideas as well, and we're anxious to work with them. So we thought about how we wanted to present the sustainability thread to you, and thought the best way is to bring in two of our teachers, Megan Hillen, who teaches 3rd grade, so she's sort of looking at the beginning from K through 3rd, and then Alicia, who teaches 4th grade and is the cultural history coordinator from 4th grade up. So here are some of our ideas about sustainability thread and where we found these connections.
Yes, as we looked at the sustainability thread, we looked at the whole lower school together and actually all the way down through pre-nursery, and we found water as a connecting focus. And we have our Amazing Buddies program, so we really wanted to include our early childhood because that could be a time when we could really focus on this together throughout the grades. And from the beginning, we look at water as an elemental force through the water cycle when we study patterns in nature, as a system with the earth systems, looking at the chemistry of water and how what we do to our water here impacts the whole world. And then as we have evolving life, its relationship with water and the changing water on our planet, human evolution's relationship with water, where as it controlled where humans settled and migrated. And then one thing that for 3rd grade that I took out of this week is early humans' impact on the environment. That's something for a new Ellie for 3rd grade, because we didn't have that before. And again, its relationship to water there.
So as we move on from these early humans who are beginning to move around, we study in the Paleolithic period of the movement out of Africa, and we follow the trends where they're following the water source and how they move and how they relocate into the Neolithic, and they're beginning to build these settlements along the water sources. And one of the ways that we can do that specifically in 4th grade is by connecting to the work of Paul Slopek with the Out of Eden Walk project, which is a wonderful global, very student-friendly, immersive project that the students can do, and they can connect all over the world with children and following his journey. So, and that's another way where he's following an ancestral path, but looking at it from a modern perspective, or how we have changed our environment just over thousands and thousands of years. It's a really easy connection in 4th grade to follow the movement out of Africa and the push-pull factors of migration, and to connect that to what's going on today with the drought and the plight of the refugees. So that's a way for our students, as they move into the upper elementary, to really focus their awareness and create that connection, because they are studying that every day in the classroom. Once they're settled, they enter into the Riverine civilization, where they learn how dependent they are on sustained flood cycles in Egypt and Mesopotamia. They look at the Nile and the Tigris-Euphrates as examples of desertification when systems are disrupted. They look at India as cultural changes when the Indus shifted, and then again at the Minoan Crete disaster from volcanic eruption and tidal waves. They can bring all of this information into discussions of the Sahel region and today, and the growth of the Sahara and the issues that are facing the people there. And they can also bring in literacy by looking at and expanding upon the Breadwinner trilogy, and possibly also reading Parvana's Journey and Mud City, where the main characters and the whole thing takes place in refugee camps. So as they're then moving on into the classical civilizations, and they look at Phoenicia, and the Phoenicians sailing around the world and how they were sharing the resources, and the water is what enabled them to do things that humans never before have been able to do, to share their culture, to share their ideas, and to bring ideas back to them. And just one easy example is just the sharing of alphabet and language.
So water became our sort of connective tissue, really, to the big idea, which we will talk about in a little bit. Yeah.
And I think the important thing that, before we go into the upper level grades, is when in the conversations that we had here together as a large group, which we've done over the last 2 days, when you look at the issue of sustainability, there are so many pieces connected to it. And so what we're showing you today are parts of those pieces. And again, if you look back at the maps, the richness is in great detail. And there's many different focuses you can go into, both on a disciplinary level and an interdisciplinary level. So I have a feeling that this was an important thread for us to articulate because it's connecting us to many of the other threads that we also have. It becomes, for lack of a better word, and I don't want to give us more vernacular, it becomes a thread of such significance that the other ones can't be spoken about without looking at it. So like even a thread of myth or spirituality can't really be looked at without understanding the thread of sustainability. The interconnectedness is so important, and that's what resonated in a lot of our conversations, is that synthetic nature of the whole conversation. It is a dynamic system, a complex dynamic system with many schema, and that's what on the upper school we wrestled a lot with in this last couple of days, is where do you put that concentration at each grade, and where do you put that concentration, and Mrs. Ross, your words were so well taken, off the thread as well. So we will also talk about places where we're looking outside of the thread, so to speak, or outside of the classroom for some of the powers to bring our students and ourselves into a participatory modality in terms of the crisis at hand. So Carol, I'm going to start with you. And Carol, as she introduces grade 7, but I think what's really important to know is that our grade 7 and grade 8 teams work very closely together, many shared resources. And so in thinking about their ideas, and a bit different from the lower school, I think that there's several categories that tie together in the upper school, which Carrie at the very end will do a nice job of pulling them up and through as we come into grade 12. So let our story be told as we unfold. But if you could talk about the importance of teaching students about collapse and the perspective that is taken in both grade 7 and 8 and the learning experiences around that.
By the time the kids come to our classroom, they are starting to think of themselves as part of the bigger picture. And so our curriculum is rich with systems examples and with collapse examples, but we focus on the Maya collapse because it so beautifully involves all the disciplines. And what we've always done well is let them see the causes and effect, the cause and effect and rise and fall of civilizations. But what we need to do more of is remind them that they're a part of an ongoing story. So they're starting to notice more what's going to happen to their children. What will the story be told when their children are sitting in the classroom? So the thing that has struck me most this week is that our children have lost connection to nature. And our team has talked about a lot of ways to help our kids see where they are in that story. In science, they're going to trace a modern artifact, an everyday artifact, to see where it came from and what resources were spent, like a paper cup or a laptop, see what sources have been used, resources were spent to get to that object.
So one of the things that Carol, you and I spoke a little bit about earlier today, to bring us back to the Maya for a second, and I think Marie Masiak was helpful in this conversation as well, is if you can speak a little bit about the slash and burn agriculture and the ties back to nature.
Thank you. So our kids need more hand-on experience. And they learn about how the Maya lived there's a chapter in the first book they read called At One with the Environment. And they understand that the Maya reached such a wonderful peak because they knew how to relate to their own environment. But then when we start to look at the theories for collapse, one of them is that the population grew and they overused their environment. Slash and burn technique took away the nutrients that they needed in their soil and couldn't support the population. So we'd like to get them more involved in gardening and being out in the soil, being out in our spiral garden. But other ways of connecting, we've taken them to Longhouse Reserve and they've sketched and they loved it. We need to do more of that. We take them to walking dunes. We have more activities planned. Anna Strong has come up with a lot more activities for the walking dunes. To connecting them more to nature and not just taking it for granted.
I think one of the important themes that Carol's hitting upon, and I think it's more relevant for the upper school as to why it's a new epiphany, or a renewed epiphany is a better way of saying it, is oftentimes when you start working with older students, You keep them in the classroom and you talk about things and you read articles and you look at media, all very important. But what came throughout the week for us was this need to connect our kids back to putting learning in action. And even if that learning is happening in a modern day period, so such as the gardening, understanding the struggles we're having with our agriculture today and looking at it from the perspective of the Maya. So always doing this comparative study, but enhancing that more. Letting kids who've never put their hands in the dirt, and we have students that come to us that haven't, get in the dirt, to look at how to have a relationship with dirt from a meaningful way and understanding the influence of the water then upon that cycle as well. So that was one of the important parts. And the whole idea of collapse, and I walked in on a fascinating conversation between the grade 7 and 8 team, but the idea of collapse, and can you talk a little bit about how then it extends into grade 8 and into looking at the medieval Islamic society into the feudal societies?
Well, in grade 8, the children observed that there was an attempt to reclaim some of the lost beauties of the Roman Empire, especially in their second unit. The Vikings, Franks, and the English that we speak is the name of the unit. And the kids understand that there was an attempt to, in their attempt to rebuild and regain those arts and those intelligences in that organization, the plague was a result. And this growing connectedness created new pathways for the destruction of the plague.
Yeah. So again, in this case, looking at plague as maybe the vector for the collapse, but that importance of understanding from collapse. And I will say that I know Mark Tompkins and others have been continuing to refine the net logo model that's been used to look at this simulation and getting kids to not only pay attention to what happened in that time period, but applying it to, again, current events. What does it indicate for what's happening now with Ebola or for other major issues that we're dealing with in today? So finding the commonality between these two grades to help a young student start to see the importance of studying collapse. And I think the other word that came forth today was emergence from collapse. So it's not just the collapse, it's what emerges from it as a result, whether that be technologies or new ideas, or in the case of a ecosystem, succession. And Bill, you've taught us a lot about resilience. And I think that's an important topic that I'm hoping that throughout the year you can continue to help us think about in relation to this.
Is this an appropriate time to interject, or do you want us to wait?
You know what?
I have something between 5th and
we love interjections at Ross, so we can go with the flow, so please.
Okay.
Bill, can you wait for a mic, though?
All right, now in the 5th grade with Riverine, we should definitely include Corral in Peru, because it gives us a teaching moment to introduce the idea of ecotones, because this ceremonial center with pyramids is suspended between the seacoast and the arid desert where the people, the ceremonial centers are, and it's watered by mist, so it fits into the hydrological cycle you set up, which is an excellent idea. Well done on that, that's great. But also it sets down the seed form of the pyramid and the ceremonial center that will be recapitulated in the Maya and also Teotihuacan in central Mexican Valley. So it gives us a chance to bring in the Latin American, which for our Latin American students will be greatly appreciated. And it brings up also the issues of collapse that we can study, because all of these things are both mythologically controlled in time. In the Book of the Hopi, you're told to leave even though you've succeeded, so it's still a nomadic residuum in a highly civilized center. So ecotone, collapse, mist as the hydrological cycle, all of these things can be threaded together.
Thank you.
5 and 7.
Thank you.
So
Great.
In Maya, one of the things happens, I was just visiting Maya ruins, visiting Maya ruins this past year, and I was shown the drains. I was with archaeologists from University of Pennsylvania, because those pyramids were flooded with water, the base, so it was like they were sitting in a lake. So, of course, we don't see that today, but if you're with somebody who knows what it is, and they showed us the drains where they could actually plug it, flood it, and have those pyramids, which is a completely different vision than you look at now if you're sitting in an excavated site.
And the cenote, the deep pool, is very important for Mayan culture, and part of the cosmology, they build an artificial pool in Corral, Peru, and this is part of their emergence mythology, so it overlaps. And of course, there's deforestation and the Lyme crisis with the building and the plastering for the pyramid structures.
You should just hold on to that.
Okay.
Just hold on to it. And we like the interjections. It's always helpful. I mean, I think it's important to say that this is meant to be a dialogue. We know that we're evolving this particular thread, and the work that we've done this week is continuing to be refined. So I'm going to kind of transfer now to both Mark and Matthew to work off of one another. And once we move into the next part, we've left the Islamic Empire, we've left feudal Europe, and we start to have the voyages of exploration. And I'm wondering, Mark, if you can summarize some of the conversations that were really important that had to do with the sustainability thread with regarding those voyages, and then Matt picking up to, how does that become further articulated as we move up in time through civilization?
Sure. Well, part of the voyages, we start off in China with Zheng He and the traveling he does with tributes back to the emperor, and why that stops, in particular reasons, and there's reasons for that, and that's a sustainability. It's again sustaining the culture, and which I like about this school, because I think I've seen it taught before where it's, oh, China was all over the place, and then they did the stupid thing of going in, and thank goodness for the Portuguese, or I've seen it taught that which is not right. Chinese did what they did because they needed to do what they needed to do, and they did that probably well. We also look at Iberian exploration down the coast of Africa. You would look at Spanish exploration in the New World, and within this, the obvious connection that we hit on a lot is the spread of smallpox and the effects of smallpox in the New World. What we hadn't done, and I think we do a pretty good job of that, and I think we also spend a lot of time highlighting the societies that are getting explored or exploited as a result of these explorations. And but I think what was we started to think about, and we actually was looking at artwork and seeing that a large number of animals, and particularly fauna, but it could probably be flora too. I'm just ignorant as far as that's concerned. But appearing in paintings that don't really belong in places where they should, and so on. And we're starting to see the effect of the reshuffling of species, and seeing the effects of that. And so the idea is one of the ideas, I think what we were trying to find is moments that you can find it within the artifacts. And so that the artifacts, forevermore, which I think I've kind of learned by looking at art history and iconography through art history, is forevermore for those students, is that whenever they see that artwork, then it unpacks a lot of information, and so that's one of the vehicles that we were trying to find, is how can we play around with that. And so we're looking at, one of the particular things was Duer's etchings of a rhinoceros that was supposed to be drawn, that was supposed to appear in Portugal, but drowned before getting there because it was chained to a mast of a ship because they didn't want it wandering around. Probably could have survived the shipwreck, but swam, but it drowned. And so he drew what his discussion, or etched what discussions of what the rhinoceros would look like. And for a lot of people, that's what it was initially, what the idea as his etchings appeared around Europe, what the rhinoceros looked like. You can just even look in the Duer print, not Duer, Bosch painting on the triptych, the first panel of Eden. You can see kind of giraffes and other animals that are kind of appearing that would be mythological and so on, which hadn't really thought about, but I was actually talking to Matthew quite a bit about this encyclopedia project and the early form of need for classification and early collections of animals, or whether they're mythical or not. But we're starting to have a relationship with these pieces of the world that we haven't had. And what is the impact of that? And you can look at a lot of the issues around. I mean, you can take the rhinoceros itself, and where do large mammals, what's their relationship today as a result of kind of this moving around and shuffling?
Another thing that could be with Voyages of Exploration is nautical design. We live next door to Sag Harbor and M-Term.
Right.
Mrs. Ross has offered Bellamy. So the Viking ship, the Celtic curragh, and the caravel of the Portuguese, and the large galleon of Shun He all give us different forms, which builds on the water cycle, and now we're having the human interaction with water. And I think a lot of kids for the Innovation Lab would really get into designing, and whether it's surfboards, windboards, or small ships, and they just can take a trip to Sag Harbor and see it. So nautical design could be a real turn-on for certain kinds of multiple intelligences.
To take it to the sustainability part, the other part that came out of this conversation, and it connects back to some of the work, David, that you were speaking with us about, and as well as just, it's an issue that we still have today with the reshuffling of animals. And obviously with the Voyages of Exploration and starting to have ballast water and packaging material that is bringing with it new forms of life to a place where it wasn't, causes a whole shift in an ecological system. And this was one of the things that I got excited when I walked into the 9th grade conversation, because that's happening right here on Long Island. And it's something, again, to apply directly. Students can be looking at the past to understand its relevance there, but you don't have to look very far in Long Island, where we live, to see where the influence is here. So again, taking knowledge from the past and making certain that our students are able to act upon it today to think about for the future as well. And all that's coming through, again, this train of water in many ways, so being able to carry. Now, obviously, there's other forms it's getting here at us all. Matthew, can you take us on the next part of our journey?
Okay. So, one of the things that I'm usually known for is talking a lot, so I'm going to do something slightly different, because I've sat out there this whole week, last week, almost 15 years in a row, and I'd like everyone to do something different right now. Take a deep breath. Think of something absolutely wonderful that you've seen or heard this week. Not the bad stuff, but the really good stuff. And just be quiet. I can hear my own heartbeat. Can you hear your heartbeat? I spend a lot of time in this room now these days because I have over 100 students in the 10th grade. They come from lots of different backgrounds, and most of them don't understand all this stuff that people have been talking about because they arrive in the 10th grade. They haven't been here for the wonderful work that people do in the lower school or in the early lower upper school. But we sit in this room, and I ask them to think about things all over the world. I show them images, I give them readings, but one of the things I really like to do is have them look at nature. Because we have this beautiful thing out here behind us. That's one reason that it was constructed this way, so we could actually see this beautiful world. And so we want the students to go out into nature, because a lot of the things that I have for them to learn are not inspiring. They're not happy. So the piece that I get to tell you about is that the 10th grade curriculum stretches from the middle of the 17th century until about the middle of the 19th century, and that is the period where the Europeans create all these problems that we've been talking about. So we spend a lot of time talking about the sustainability issue. It is part and parcel of the curriculum that we're teaching. And so I can show you the histomap, and we can talk about the things that are on there, or I can give you an example. So I want to just give you one example, and that is that this issue about population development really is identified by the Europeans in the late 18th and early 19th century, and the person that gets the most credit for that is a man named Thomas Malthus. The Malthusian essay that he produces in 1806 is widely read even today by all kinds of different social thinkers. But basically he said that there's a problem, which is that humans propagate exponentially and agricultural production grows arithmetically. And if you know anything about mathematics, and we try to show this very clearly to our students, the population growth is going to outstrip food supply inevitably. That is just inevitable. And so they were already talking about this. 300 years ago, people have been talking about this. You and I just happen to be living in the world where we think that is happening. And so what I need my students to understand is, well, if we've been thinking about it for 300 years, why have we not found a solution for this thing? And the truth is that Malthus had a solution for it. And he talks about it in the essay, and I wanted to show you the quote, because it's a really great quote. I show the students every year. It's really long, but I'll just paraphrase. He says, look, if we want a solution to this, what we really should do is locate our villages near cesspools. We should not let doctors try and heal the sick. We should really just try and get people to die, because the more people who die, the less likely we are to have overpopulation.
Was it cannibalism part of it?
He didn't really go with cannibalism. He was a Christian. He didn't think cannibalism was a good idea. So, but this is the crux of the problem for us. Like, we're really good at identifying what the problem is. Our real problem is identifying what the solution is going to be to that problem. The other major issue that we try to think about in the 10th grade is our theme is the rise of the individual. So it's about the flowering of the concept that all humans have rights, and that those rights should be maintained by their governments. And if the governments don't maintain those rights, that the people have the right to then well up together and create a new government that is actually going to protect those rights. And one of the rights that people seem to have is the right to eat, the right to live, the right to have fresh water, these kinds of things. And that is the problem, because as you spread that idea out into a population that is growing exponentially, more and more people want those things. And we've been identifying that, and some of our speakers this week have been very articulate in showing us how that has happened and the results of that. So what we try to get our students to think about is, well, what happens when humans overpopulate? We have a wonderful project that we call the Malthus Project, in which we ask them to do a simulation game. Up until now, we've mostly done that simulation game the way it was designed, which was to hand out a bunch of little bits and pieces of paper that replicate fish, and the students have pick how they're going to fish in that particular population. And what we hope that they find is that by exploring different types of fishing, long nets, long line hooks, and these kinds of things, that they overfish their population and they run out of fish very rapidly, and they play this game. What we have found over the last couple of years is that as our population grew here in the school, right, here's a sustainability issue, we can't play that simulation game the same way. There's just too many kids for us to play it in the way that we always have. So we ourselves are actually having the same problem that we see in the world. Sitting here and thinking and listening to Ralph talk about fisheries early this week, I turned to Kim Borsak, my science teacher, and I said, hey, here's a perfect opportunity for us. We're always looking for places to use that logo. All the students have computers. It would be very simple for us to turn the fish game into a net logo exercise in which they actually can do that thing digitally, and we don't actually have to have them sit on the floor and have little pieces of paper together. So one of the things that Patty and we've been talking about as a team and as a domain is, how can we actually look at the curriculum that we have and the way that we've been presenting it and find better ways for that to happen. And making connections between the grades is important, and Mark actually mentioned that as well. But here's a very concrete way for us to actually think about a project that we already do that we can actually improve on, and perhaps it will then connect to, in the culmination of this project, I should tell you, is that the students look at statistical data from the 19th century, and we have them plot that on a graphing calculator to see what the best fit model is for things like increased iron production that leads to industrialization, increased food production, because part of the question is, well, if Malthus identified this thing, why didn't the population collapse in the 19th century or the 20th century? And they can see that even though there are more people around, there's more production being produced, and there's actually more food to eat, and more transportation to move things around. So in fact, we've overcome the problems that Malthus identified. And what we will probably do now is make a much more conscious effort to connect that to the types of issues that we've been talking about this week, so that we can actually show them migratory issues related to refugees, or the problems with lack of water in certain areas. So the problem for us, of course, is always, and I say this to all the teachers out there because I think it's important, and I'm talking to you guys as well, but we have, as everyone has said, such a rich curricula, that it's really hard for us sometimes to keep adding things to it because there's not enough time to do all these things. And we don't want to take anything away from it. We don't want to remove pieces of it, but we can tweak them to really reflect more the issues that are important to us. And so for us, that sustainability thread is already there, and it's just a question of making the implicit more explicit. And that's where we're really going. And I'll stop.
Thank you, Matthew. I have a great affinity for that particular unit. I will take credit for bringing the fish game into it, but I will say that actually came from the Cloud Institute, which is Institute for Sustainability, and it's really the idea of the tragedy of the commons and understanding it, which I think tied well to what Sylvia's Earl's talk showed us this week as well. So for the students to understand that, and I think what I've always appreciated most about the project is the relevance to today, and there's a great effort made to look at today's statistics and to look at big numbers today, so that you're not just looking at what was happening during that time frame, but finding the parallel to it today and unpacking it in a neo-Malthusian way, so to speak, at this moment. But where is the relevance? And I think Matthew, if I can just say, one of the things that he kept reminding us in our larger conversations is turning to the students and saying, we need your input to help find that solution. We are growing your awareness, we're helping you to create the knowledge, we're connecting the past to the present, but we need to work together to identify solutions. What do you think? And that was a really important part of the conversation that Matthew kept bringing us all back to.
Can I make one more point?
Sure.
I'm sorry. It's a point. It's a point that I feel is important to bring up continually, and that is that, as I said before, there are no easy solutions. If there were, then they would be telling us what the answer is right now, right? And we don't have the easy solutions. What we know is the problem, right? But what we're doing in this school, the way that Bill designed this curriculum and the way that the teachers have actually implemented it, is creating people that are going to go out there and change the world. And I look at Ryan Anderson at the back of this room, and I look at Kozma, and I look at Sylvia, and these are the products of this school. And they are dedicated to changing the things that have been going on, right? And that's really so even though we are just working in at the end of, I made this point before, but at the end of Candide, Voltaire has had Candide go all over the world, and he's seen all these horrible things that have happened, and it's a miserable world that's happening there in the 18th century. And Candide eventually ends up back in Constantinople, and there's no real resolution to the end of it, and so we have to help the students kind of understand what Voltaire was looking for. And at the end, Candide is literally just living in Constantinople, and someone asked him, well, what did you learn? And he said, well, what I learned was that I have to tend my own garden, that what I do myself will have greater ramifications for everyone else. And I can't go out and photograph glaciers. That's just not me. And I can't go out and, I'm not the person who's going to go work in Africa and do these wonderful things. But I'm tending the garden, and all the people in this room are tending their own garden, and that is so important for you to remember. And I absolutely think that's the greatest stress that we can put on this thing.
Wow, well said.
So you can see that, Matthew, thank you for your passion with that as well. The other piece before I introduce Jen Cross to speak that I think has been incredibly important throughout this week, and why working in a interdisciplinary team setting is so critical, is the folks in the room who kept reminding people like me who can go way off in the world of science about ethics, morality, compassion, understanding. And I think that that has been a theme throughout all of our conversations as a whole school as we've looked at this issue, that when we talk about diversity and we talk about biodiversity and we talk about population growth, we are always trying to also put a face back onto it, that those numbers are people, and those people are experiencing circumstances, and that the diversity, and Deborah said this again this morning, the diversity of culture and preserving culture is as equally as important as the diversity of our plants, that it's a co-evolving system, not separate systems, but a co-evolving system. So leading into the next part, which those of you who have not lived our curriculum, what happens in the upper school grades is everything just starts moving faster. You know, in terms of looking at history, we're just moving faster, but we're also getting more and more complex as we move faster. And I think that the 11th grade, pulling off of the ideas of others as they reach to modernity, are starting to look more at that complexity and looking at big ideas pulling off of population growth and ideas of diversity and what that means. So Jen, do you want to talk a little bit?
Well, first I want to thank my colleagues up here because, and this is a wonderful thing that we do, to be able to see where we are, even at the younger grades, and some of the issues that you're talking about. And Carol, the things you brought up about collapse and emergence, you know, so much tie into the 11th grade curriculum. And they also, for you to identify the need to your students to get out in the dirt and, you know, experience nature. I think that's really critical. I hope that's a takeaway that we all have from this. Because Matthew, first of all, he's so brilliant. I love teaching next to him. And sometimes I hear him, and it's a wonderful benefit of being able to teach next to him. But I wanted to add this wonderful curriculum that he approaches. He didn't mention the romantic rebellion that happens within it, which is, you know, during that period where everyone wanted to go back to nature. They wanted to go outside and paint in nature. And we actually take our students out and do plein air painting as part of that unit. So I'm to talk about the 11th grade, and I want to just give a shout out to my team members who helped me organize some of these thoughts, because I work with really brilliant people, I think. The 11th grade studies, we do a unit on the emergence of the modern mentality. And our study of sustainability is based on the premise that diversity is an essential principle of survival, of ecosystems as well as culture and human communities. So in science, we study Darwin's theory of evolution and transmission and molecular genetics. The importance of these play in biodiversity and ecosystems, as well as their roles in speciation and extinction, will be examined in the context of mankind's influence on the environment and ongoing climatic change. As we study energy, the importance for the need of alternative energies is discussed and examined. In cultural history, we look at imperialism, systems of oppression, and of course, you know, during this period, we're looking at 1850 to the modern times now. We're looking at world conflicts that are really the examples of collapsing unsustainable systems and the emergence of new systems. In English, we look at authors that are coming from colonial situations or victims of oppressive regimes, and were seeing voice to people that are kind of protesting this state of sexism, racism, and oppressive systems. In math, they look at statistics as a tool to try to understand what's going on, but acknowledge the unpredictability of some of those systems and the uncertainty principle. In the fine arts, we study similarly emergent visions. We look at the role of artists as members of the avant-garde. We look at the formation of modern art movements that redefine cultural identity. We look at the retrieval of tribal art forms, Picasso and African art, for example. We look at the merging of function and aesthetics and the innovative use of materials in the Bauhaus. How designers maybe can be, you know, the people that provide us with solutions. We look at Dada as a reaction to the horrors of World War I, the absurdity of Dada. We look at the exploration of altered states of consciousness, the surrealism, as a reaction to Freud and some of the knowledge about the unconscious. But I think the way I teach it, and I think one of my purposes here really is to help students understand art as a force for sustaining the human spirit. So I think that during this time period of, it's so close to home, the period that we're studying, it's yesterday, recent yesterday, kind of sets them up for where we are today. And hopefully we can start having them imagine what might be solutions coming from the variety of disciplines they've studied. And that's how we work at this school. I think we need to inspire hope in our students. First, educate them, make them aware, and then also let them know that, that we have a belief that they can provide solutions. I remember in the earliest days when Bill Thompson talked about his spiral curriculum, and he talked about human beings have always created terrible problems for themselves, but the nature of human beings is that they also can find solutions. And I think if we can impart that to our students, then that gives us true purpose. And that's all I have to say.
One comment I'd like to make about emergence connecting the high school is what you have in Malthus, the Irish famine is a good, and we look at that because it's such a perfect example of the discrepancy between logarithmic and arithmetic increase. But it also introduced what Naomi Klein calls the shock doctrine of conscious crisis management to restructure the poor by the landowners and the aristocrats. And so the forms of government, Courtney has always said our mission is to train leaders for this new planetary civilization. So crisis management begins to emerge as a new kind of challenge to governance. But the model of consciousness, and this is the connection to grade 12, is the old Lockean one of impressions and ideas. And so we have bicameral legislatures. What's emerging now in our time is the two real conferences of Maurice Strong and the UN, where now advisors are not just going to be advisors to presidents, but we need tricameral legislatures. And the structure of actual social democracy is coming through an evolution of the shift from economics and businessmen running the country to ecology as the governing science and biopolitics that I and Giorgio Agamben have written our books about. So the last chapter of Self and Society is a kind of way in which consciousness biopolitics are creating new ideas of governance, because the bicameral legislature is an old epistemology, and it's utterly inadequate to the new theory of mind that's coming out in consciousness studies. So the rise of philosophes in grade 10 in your area, and then in the grade 11, the polarization between globalization versus planetization, and then into David's work with consciousness, all of this can be threaded together through the concept of emergence.
Thank you.
It's already implicit in what you guys have been saying.
Before we move to grade 12, I believe Dr. Kwazimi, you'd like to say something? Yes, please. We'd love you to.
One opinion just said the discussing and just thinking and thinking. Sometimes it doesn't work. The solution must be very important. Yeah. Yes, it's true. But I think I really believe the vision and philosophy must be very important. If we don't have such kind of thing, we can't behave correctly. And so I think we think globally and we should act locally. That's very important. And for example, I have been working for the disaster area in Japan since 3 years ago. I tried and tried, but I couldn't find any solution because it's so much complex and so much deep. The people there lost everything. Many people just want to die, but still they are living. And what we should do? And I tried and made many failures, but still I'm trying to do that. It's a good chance for me to think about what are the most important issue or most important problem. And finally, I found that the urbanization itself has a lot of problems. And especially in case of the urbanization in Japan, it's not so good. It has the very deep original problems. So after that, I thought about what's the, what should I say, proper idea of new urbanization. And when I just thought about such kind of things, I had a chance to work with the people in China, because China strongly want to have the new urbanization, new type of, the Chinese type of urbanization. So I have been working for that, and because it's also useful to make some solution for our disaster area. It looks like not so much related, but it's very much related, because in case of China, you know there are a lot of problems, especially the, what should I say, the problem of agricultural areas, very wide, and people are very poor. A lot of problems occurring from there. So the new urbanization is really the very critical issue. And I have been working for that. And finally, recently, I had a chance to meet with the president of China, Xi Jinping. So this is just one case. Just at the beginning, I worked for disaster area, and I had the very serious, I just realized there is a very serious problems there. The apparent problems are not so important, but we just confront to such kind of the apparent issues. Then we can reach to the very deep, real problems. So such kind of process is very important. Also, it's helpful for the education and this kind of the school. So I think the vision and philosophy must be the first. And then we act locally, and gradually local activity becomes a very international activity.
Right. The spread of it.
So I think, I believe such kind of possibility.
Great,
so
thank you.
That's what I would like to say.
And we will definitely come back and address our ideas around that when we come to the big project, because I think you've helped us set us up well for that. So I'm gonna.
I think Bill.
We have built into the architecture of grade 11 the spatialization, the global space, and the rise of visions, the Taiping Rebellion, and these visionary movements that occur around the country as a response to globalization. So this tension between vision and the consolidation of space economically and the rise of the mythologizing of time as part of the structure of grade 11. But what I think we should do, listening to you, is we should make Fukushima part of 12 connecting to the Irish famine. And so we really bring it down, you know, to an issue that's now. So that's a really great idea.
Thank you. So in thinking about the final year at Ross, the capstone year, and for those of you who aren't as aware, it's a recapitulation of the spiral curriculum, but it's looking at the 5 mentalities. And in thinking about this with grade 12, of course, there's touchstones in each one of the areas that they study, but really looking most critically at the complex dynamical mentality, because that's where we are now, and thinking about that from that standpoint. And I'm going to allow Carrie to talk, because I think when we were all talking together as a group, what we realized is, which is obvious, but to state it explicitly, what we realize is what is happening in all the way up through our curriculum comes to a crescendo at this point, and it's within the grade 12 where they're really working to synthesize the ideas and look really critically at the complexity of sustainability and looking at it as a complex dynamical system, which it is, because without that framework, it is too hard to make the next move, as you said, Dr. Kwazumi, to starting to looking at solution-based thinking. And so I'm going to allow Carrie to kind of string together some of the topics, which are plentiful, but to kind of come to the critical 5 I think she mentioned earlier today.
Thanks. And I also, I had great support on this from my teammates. Thank you so much. What we did this week first was try to look at the elements of our curriculum, which is about 40,000 years of history, that touch on topics that deal with sustainability. And there's, as you can probably imagine, a lot. But we did that. We wrote down all of our items first on a Google document and then on the histomap. And then we looked at it all. And after some reflection and discussion, we saw certain kind of themes that we see through the year, which begins with Paleolithic times and goes, as Patty said, all the way up to the complex dynamical mentality. And so what I want to do is just say first, like, what are the 5 or 6, actually, one of them is 2 parts, things that we just kept, that we saw as themes in the year. And the first one was, of course, and this one might seem fairly obvious, and that's the way that humans change the environment, which they've been doing since Paleolithic times, as you heard. This, this dramatically changes when the Neolithic Revolution or the agriculturalization happens, and that's one of the first of what Carlton called the punctuations. But we also see there, as we do elsewhere and further all throughout the curriculum, the relationship between those changes and cultural and social structures. You can't really look at the way the environment changes without looking at culture and society. And that brings me to my next theme, which is something that is emphasized by our art history teacher, Terry, and that's the built environment. And this is ranging from the materials that are used, plant material, wood, eventually you get concrete and cement and ores, and it's not just architectural structures and buildings, but also the roads and the various other products of urbanization, which also arises with civilization. And not just what they're built out of, but why they're built. What are they built for? Ranging from temples to ceremonial centers to eventually shopping malls, and then even refugee camps, right? So it's going throughout the whole history. Another thing that we saw, and this was Carlton's made this point, is that, and it's fairly obvious, but the increased impact over time, and like I said, punctuated by certain points, and one of them was the agriculturalization, and the other is industrialization, as we all know. And also, with addition, kind of this is part 2 of the 3rd point, is from relatively isolated and relatively independent communities to increasingly interconnected ones. And that's really also, like the others, an exponential story. Alex made the point that she looks at, or what she saw was how certain literary genres reflect, express, and are influenced by changing environment and changing society. So the example that we discussed, and there are others, was the novel, right, which emerges in the 10th grade, yes. And you look at the novel, you look at the middle class, you look at the middle class, you look at the economy, you look at the economy, you look at the environment. I mean, you really see a complex dynamical system here. And that's before we get to the complex dynamical mentality. And there are other examples of this. If you're looking at courtly love in the Middle Ages, or modernists responding to the dislocations of the late 19th and early 20th century. And this is just literature. The same could be said for any other cultural form, including music. We have a musician, a performing arts teacher who comes in and talks to the students. And then our math teacher pointed out that math is consistently, over time, always used as a technological tool to shape the environment and help impact it or change it. So those are the 5 or 6 kind of overarching things that we saw. And we do kind of focus on the complex dynamical mentality. Even just now, as I explained how we look at the different mentalities, we can do that. But then we get to the the 20th century, and the complex dynamical mentality is the mentality of the J curve, right? So a lot of things, you know, in the trajectory of change take that, well, for you guys, am I right, or is it this way for you? I'm trying to give you the mirror image. And so, like I said, all of these connections that you can make earlier, but they really exponentially increase in the time period that we're studying, and also, well, in the complex dynamical mentality, I should say. And also, there's a real kind of dramatic increase in awareness and a movement to try to do something about it. And this is not just true for the environment. This is the age of mass society and mass movements. You see a lot of different large movements for change, and the environmental movement is one of them. But it's the one that we know today is born during the kind of complex dynamical mentality. And so we look at not just the problems, like those problems that Matt said that his curriculum talks about, all the bad things that were done, well, they only continue in the time period that follows. And now there's this really great effort to try to do something about it. And so we look at the history, some of the increased problems, whether it's mass production or increased pollution or new types of pollution like toxic pollution or certain chemicals. DDT, for instance, is one of the iconic ones, or nuclear technology. But also there's, to get to what someone was saying earlier about the mystics and the mechanists, there are different kinds of responses to environmental problems. There are the utilitarians who are worried about resources running out so that the humans won't have enough of them. And then there are the preservationists who are looking at a forest and seeing not board feet but a cathedral. And so we look at that kind of dynamic between those two, in the history class, between those 2 points of view. And ultimately we get to you know, the last 30 years where you see a lot of global efforts, the UN, various other non-governmental organizations, and this, you know, this really great effort to try to do something about the environment. But one of the things is that we're kind of using, we're in a shifting mentality, right? So when we talk about the efforts to change, we're still kind of using the language of the previous, like, consumer mentality, or the kinds of solutions, like, reducing impact, or, reducing how much we use. But we're still using a mentality that I mean, in an earlier meeting, somebody said, well, what do I tell my students when they say, what will be, if we're going to a new mentality, what will it look like? And the response is, well, we don't know. If we knew, it wouldn't be a new mentality, right? So when I talk to the students about where we're headed, and we have them do a project about, what the world might look like at 2050, it's kind of hard for us to get there because our consciousness is evolving. But I try not to, I mean, certainly it's important that they think about the danger and the great, tragedies that are taking place and that will take place. But we also, and we've heard this story a bit, there's a certain kind of resilience. There is resilience in humans. I mean, we were just talking about collapse and emergence. Now, somebody said earlier that, humans might go extinct, species go extinct all the time, but it's going to be a while, and I don't want my students to worry about themselves becoming extinct. But I do want them to think about, how people are really trying to make positive change. And this is happening in a lot of ways. People are coming up with all sorts of some really good and some really wacky ideas about what they can do about changing the environment, ranging from, a little light that you can illuminate, you can turn it on by I'm not kidding, a drop of blood, or sidewalks that eat smog, or bicycles that actually breathe. And they're not very successful, some of these things, but it's a thing, people trying to do solutions. And then there are others like hybrid vehicles, or, you know, I never go to the supermarket without taking my reusable shopping bag. And you know, 20 years ago, that was not the case. So people are trying to change things, but we're still kind of using an old paradigm. But then I also tell them about the sharing economy. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with like Airbnb and that, you know, that whole kind of community of people who share, you know, who get online and make arrangements to give people rides to the airport and whatnot. But it's a kind of, it's a different kind of economic way of thinking. So I try to give them some hope. And I want to just say one more thing, and that is that Bill mentioned the mist in Peru, right? Like, one of the things that I read about, that I thought of when you said that was, have you heard about the billboard in Peru? There's this area in Peru where it never rains, but it's very humid. And there's just water all over the air, but it never rains, so people don't have any water. And so this guy made this billboard that actually captures water from the air, and people go up to the billboard and turn on a spigot, and they get water.
Yeah,
right?
it's incredible.
I mean, and there are so many of these kinds of inventions out there that people are coming up with, trying to figure out how we can actually live more sustainably. And so I try to you know, point those things out to kids, because it inspires them, and it makes them have hope. And I think that's all I have to say.
So it's a lot to take in. I think what's critical to all of this, and that will shift us to the next part of our program, in all honesty, is really thinking about the word that came to everyone at the end is participatory action. And what does that mean? But to kind of play off of what I just said to you, I think it takes a much larger set of experts of various, you know, backgrounds, ages, groups, to come in to also be facilitators of that, to give that sense of hope or new ways of thinking, because, you know, all of us sit here with our own baggage and have our own obstacles that either prevent us from thinking in a solution-oriented way or trap us in our own modalities. So that openness to more than one set of frameworks is critically important to helping our students see the possible pathways.
But it's also important to talk to the students. Right?
Absolutely.
That highlights that as well, because they're full of ideas.
Yeah, so to have that be a reciprocal process is really important. But we were most recently, and for those of you who are joining us, I think you're the only one, Rob, but maybe there's some other people out here, Mrs. Ross asked us, as she always does, to dream and to think bigger and about how we could adopt a school-wide focus for this year. And there's a couple of things that I will say to frame some of the thinking outside of the thread that you just heard before we start to unveil some of those ideas that are critical. And I know Jeanette will pick up on one of the threads as well for the lower school. It really became apparent throughout this week of listening to all the speakers and looking at all the movies, and I speak from an administrative standpoint in terms of where could I affect change within our own system. We have a lot to do in a day, but I realized as the week went on, we have opportunities that are missed that we're going to take advantage of this year that we haven't done in as much of a focused effort as we should have in the past. And the one is really the recommitment to current events, making certain that in all areas we are trying to bring the current event topic to light in a meaningful way, where you have time to unpack it from a historical framework, but also to react to it in an emotional level as necessary. And much of that has to happen in different constructs than what we've used traditionally. So we will be recommitting our advisory times and our town meeting times to that cause, and to really thinking about in a small group or pulling smaller groups together how to help students read through information, unpack information, look at data on a shared set, so that when we come back together we've had similar experiences and we can speak about it, but then leading to the point where we're activating our students' voice in that process to be the ones to bring those current events to bear for critical conversation. And this will lead to teach-in days, and we know that's incredibly important. We've always been the license to disrupt a day and have a teach-in, and it's hard to move beyond that because we all look at, but I have to. But I think this week has really raised the awareness that we need to do that, and that there's times when we have to stop what's happening to take the moment that's available to us to be able to unpack it. So I ask us all to know that that's my goal for this year, is for us to really recommit to that and taking the time to do it in a meaningful way and support each other in that process. And I know you spoke a little bit about that for the lower school as well. Do you want to?
Sure. I know it came up earlier as well. I feel very strongly about this, that we have to educate ourselves first. Because I was saying, and Rob can attest to this, there are so many people in the world who think Africa is a country, right? And so we have to start there and educate ourselves about what's going on. And because we were talking about Africa with after Gonzalo's talk, you know, we came up, our minds were just spinning. My mind is still spinning about some of the things that we could do. But how do we bring that down to the level for young children? You heard one of my parents who was in the audience this week express her views, her concerns about frightening the children and so on. And I want to hold up this big sign saying, trust, you know, we know what we're doing.
Just
but
keep saying that.
yes, exactly. Keep saying that.
Trustees believe that.
Yeah. But I think, you know, there's a little naivete there. Our children are exposed to so much in the media. If she thinks that, you know, her children are not hearing some of these things, I think she's walking around with blinders. But anyway, I think to bring it down to the young children's level, it's fairly easy for us to do that with core values in the school. That's where we start. It's a basic human rights issue, right? Our children can talk about bullies. They can talk about territorial issues on the playground in the sandbox. These are all things that are very familiar to them. And as Dr. Koizumi said, you know, think globally but act locally. So bring it down from the known with the young children to the unknown and start there. So that's how we would go about it. And of course, I would reassure my parents that we will keep them informed of anything that we choose to do if we go the route of the refugees and so on, so that we actually are a community and we're working together. So we'll let them know the how, the why, the what, and some ideas for discussion at home, because they're big global ideas that they can talk to their children about. So that's, you know, that's part of the framing of our discussion today. We have, you know, several ideas on different things on the whole school. Yeah. We came up with some great ideas. The other thing I'll say is I feel strongly about this too, that teaching empathy to young children, this is where we have to start as well. It's about putting yourself in the shoes of other people. And our young children can do that. They get it. They really get it. So I have no fears, no concerns about doing some wonderful project if that's, you know, how we choose to go with our young students, and even bring it down to the early childhood level. There are many different things we can do.
I see that Eve has something to say, and then David. Eve has the microphone right now, so David, you're next.
You receive children. Children have received the information from their parents and from you, from their education. And it's, for me, I have seen many children in my wife coming from anywhere, everywhere. There are some things which are very simple and very basic, and which must be known by everybody. You have to take account of science at the level of it is. At the level of it is, it's already difficult to tell them, but we can say that for the moment, we think that life, the earth, the atmosphere is like the universe is like that. So that our history, it's a history of 14 billion years. 14 billion years is a lot for people. So let's say that it's a long story. It's a very long story. Don't talk about 13.7. Doesn't mean anything. That by chance, our planet has a biosphere. And the biosphere is a precious heritage. All the things which are around us, the plants, the animals, are a precious heritage. Sometimes I tell the children, that the trees are cousins, are relatives, and that the animals, the grasses are relatives. And when they leave the room, they are walking like that, to be kind with their cousins, you see. That everything is changing. Everything is changing all the time. I heard one of you talking about the green. Before the green was the rock, and after the green it will be the towns, and after the town something else. So I like the green, but I don't mind actually. It was not green before, it will not be green after, and the green for the moment is nice, but don't think only about the green. We have to take care of our house, the biosphere, not our planet. I told you that yesterday, because the planet doesn't care about the climate change.
It's true.
At all. We have to respect everyone, every man, every woman, every young, every old, thank you, every black, every green, every yellow, whatever. So you have to be respectful. And you have, of course, to admire and respect the diversity. The diversity, and forget about the equality. The equality doesn't exist. The equality doesn't exist between man and female, between male and female. Our brain is not exactly the same, so how we can talk about equality? But equality is not the important thing. There is no hierarchy. There is no hierarchy. There is respect of everyone. And again, there is respect of diversity. That many species have been extinct, and it's nice to try to keep the white bear, for instance. Okay, but nobody cares anymore about the extinction of mammoths. The mammoths that I like so much. The mammoths died, and everybody cared about that. And everybody currently, unfortunately, doesn't care about this extension of some snakes, for instance. And snakes are as important as white bear. So it's emotion, and emotion is very important. Yeah. But emotion has also to be temperate. Too emotional is not good for me. In every tale, that's something else. You have carnivores and you are herbivores. And carnivores have always to be destroyed. This is very bad. The nature is not nice. Nature is not nice at all. And there are ecosystems. In ecosystem, if you have herbivores, you must have carnivores. So it's very bad to kill the hunter, to kill the carnivores. So I am trying also to say that as better as possible. It's not easy, because everywhere in the world, the hunters, the carnivores are very poor guys who have to disappear. Well, solution anyway, just to finish, because there are so many things to do. Solution is, of course, education. You know that very well. Education is possible. Education is important, it's essential, and education is as early as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think David had a comment.
Yeah, we just do that, we'll be fine. eating dinner last night across the street, and it does strike me when I'm around. I mean, I'm in good health. I'm a white male born in the United States. Sitting there eating the highest quality calories ever been available to any animal ever to exist on this planet. That is the most astounding piece of good fortune that I can possibly imagine. And then to do what I do for a living, just to get to look at and explore how magnificent the world is. And then also, because I work on projects about endangered species and ocean acidification and things like that, people ask me, well, don't you get depressed? Well, I do if I forget how beautiful the world is. So this conversation about sustainability, it is a nightmare. 7 billion people and growing, that's a lot of suffering, and what the solution is. I mean, that is what we are all asked constantly, and what we ask each other and ask ourselves. So in your curriculum, if you were to graduate 30% of your students who could actually have better equipment to answer that question, well, what are we going to do about it? They'd be in so much better shape than I'm in. That would be. Yeah. So I use us. But use me. I can't volunteer for anybody else. But I'm just, it's so. We have such an opportunity. And even if we fail, it's much more interesting to try.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. We will use you in many ways. And I think I want to talk a little bit about the big project, because I know we were asked to, but at some point I'd also would like to, because I think some of that 30% sits in our audience, to be honest. I think we have graduates here that are already starting to think that way, that can help us learn from them or offer us opportunities. I'm going to take us down the next part and frame the next part of this conversation, because it's critically important to go back to the very beginning of how we began this presentation, which is, and I think it was said very well by, who was sitting right here? It was Rob who said it. Someone else said it too, and it's the importance of philosophy and vision. So I'm going to go back to that for a second, because it's about, oh, that was Dr. Kwazimi, thank you. All these great minds, I can't keep everybody straight. But philosophy and vision, I'm going to bring it back to Ross School. And those of you, what we just shared with you was a historical lens through what we're looking at now. And that's really important. Ross has been about teaching the past to understand the present, to move to the future. And so what we've just done is shown you that pathway that we thought was critically important to be able to unpack for students and adults alike, to understand the now and the urgency of the now as we move not to the far future, but to the near future. What are we going to do next? The most difficult phase is that solution finding phase, but that's what we're trying to do. So I just want to reiterate, what you heard up here was to help you to understand how we're contextualizing the learning within the classroom to get to the now. And as Mrs. Ross mentioned to me, and who's synthesizing everything we're saying yet to the next meta level, is the idea that when we even talk about current events, to recast that or reframe that to saying we're talking about now. This is a moment where we're talking about the urgency of now, today, as we look to the future. And that's a really important lens for us to have. So we were asked by Mrs. Ross to think about a big project. And we also had just a quick conversation about the biosphere and keeping the biosphere in mind. The biosphere is the lens through which we're looking through most of this, in terms of the natural resources, that one thin layer all the way around our Earth that we all share in common, and how we utilize those resources, or to use a word of Eve's, how we take care of our home, affects the now and affects where we're going. So as a whole school, there were three really important ideas that came out in terms of our participatory action. And one is we need to simultaneously, and I will say simultaneously because it's very important, be working on a local level to engage our students in the idea of what it means to be an active participant, so that we all have committed to the idea of looking at even, and Carrie, you're going to have to help me again, the 350 organization, right? Did I say it right this time?
350.
The 350 organization, which is an organization that is having people really look at their contributions to understanding carbon load at this point. Obviously, we're at 400, so 350 isn't really relevant, but how do we make change, and how do we bring down to that level again by changing behaviors? So that's something that we can all participate in, no matter what our grade level. At the same time, we're looking at how do we take this to a global level. So the continent of Africa, correct all of our language, the continent of Africa is our focus, and what we all talked about together as a large group, and we are at the stage where we're identifying possibilities, and we'll want to move to a point where we can speak with experts to look at resources and have our students doing meaningful research to narrow the idea. But the idea of education is first and foremost. That came out loud and clear across everyone. How can we engage in helping to educate young people in Africa, wherever that may be, and the adults that are with them? So it wasn't just looking at one sector, it was looking at more than one sector. Whether that be working through a refugee program, or whether that might be turning into a more long-term situation, or whether, as you said, Gonzalo, that's helping to align with a network of schools or a school where we could be of resource help, of whatever that might be. That was one of the ideas that came out of this. And that's a big idea, and we know that there's a lot that has to be looked at in order to see how do you move beyond the idea phase to the next phase. But I want to reiterate, because I think it was really important that Eve said, and other people have said too, is we know that we must do this simultaneously to inoculating our own students or bringing them into participatory action here as well, in order to engage in what's happening on a larger scale. So to be working on both fronts in smaller ways. I know that the other piece of this that we had talked about as well, in terms of really thinking about resources as well. Where can we use innovative technology to our advantage? You know, how can we use design ideas playing off of the culture in general here at Ross and the Innovation Lab, in terms of looking at possible ideas associated with sustainability that could be used in other areas other than in terms of helping. The tent question has come up multiple times. The image that you gave us, Gonzalo, of a tent where you came back in and the bugs were dead on your bed, I have to say is such a strong image that many people have spent time talking about. Well, why is that? Why does it have to be that? Why can't we look at that? So also this idea of playing around, and I think it was well spoken about in terms of materials and material design, and how can we play with that internally here to start looking at a larger focus. So there's many different ideas. I'm going to ask first David, because he's been quiet, but for a reason, we've been saving him, to really talk about some of the ideas that he has had in terms of raising awareness, and ways that we can raise awareness not only within our own school, but also by bringing in other contributors and possible people who could help facilitate financially and other ways some of the ideas that we might get ourselves to as we go down the pathway. So Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just a few conversations we had in various groups over the course of the past few days. We've been thinking about how to frame the work that we do with the students in a bigger picture, and how to create a project that is unified but not necessarily monolithic or one-dimensional, so that there may be many different groups contributing in many different ways. And Mrs. Ross, I think, stopped just shy of using the word, and I know Lisa mentioned it again later in the day, of thinking almost in terms of something like a science fair but a sustainability fair. And there are a few things that I've been in talks with Jen Chidsey and our admissions folks in the past year of thinking about organizing an event in conjunction with the TED folks. They do conferences called TEDx Youth Conferences, where the primary presenters and the primary audience is expected to be young people. And I think we might think about partnering with them or an organization like them and creating something that not only brings what we're doing out into the community, but brings people from the community into Ross to share what they're doing and to contribute to those resources. Another organization or another forum that Innovation Lab has been involved with for the past 2 years is this the maker movement, and this event that we go to every September with the students in New York City called Maker Faire, which brings together people who are just creating things. And some of them are things they're doing for fun, some of them are things they're doing to solve problems, some of them are motivated by very similar concerns to the kinds that we're expressing this past week. This year, the Innovation Lab students are going to Maker Faire as presenters, not just observers. And we're going to have our booth where we're showing up some of our students' work. But Maker Faire also allows private individuals and organizations to hold events. And you can hold a mini Maker Faire and bring people into the community around a particular theme. So I think also maybe thinking about as a possible goal, whatever these projects wind up looking like, I'm sure some of them will involve, like Patty said, thinking about structures, thinking about the environment, thinking about water. We've already had multiple Innovation Lab and senior projects about water in areas where it's a scarce resource, about alternative fuels. And having a mini Maker Faire hosted at Ross, bringing in people from the community and sharing some of our activities, maybe having these events back to back, so that you've got the sort of intellectual, theoretical, presentational part of what's going on, and then the hands-on, experiential, these are things we've actually made. And I think these are ways that we can take some of these ideas that you'll hear, I think, in the next few minutes that people have been coming up with in the past few days. Take them outside the walls of Ross and really bring people together around some of these themes.
Matthew, and then Bill, and then I know also Megan and Alicia had some thoughts too.
You know, I was thinking about this in the same context as that, you know, motivating students is always an issue, and sometimes you can motivate them by just simply creating a prize or something. So we have very few prizes here at the school. Many schools have lots of prizes, and we have a few. And one of them is the Courage to Create prize, which is usually awarded to the senior who's considered to have the most creative project. And oftentimes that goes to an art project in most cases, because it tends to be something that we think of as in creativity. But as Dave mentioned, we've had numerous projects that are also really motivated towards helping people. So perhaps we could create a second prize that would be, whatever this term we're going to use, that would be specific for sustainability projects, like the one that the water purification project last year. And then maybe even take it further, because we've had several students who've actually raised money for their projects through crowdsourcing campaigns like Kickstarter, and then maybe that becomes the next step for it, is we look at those projects and see how they can actually apply, and then see if we can run some kind of a crowdsourcing campaign to like actually put it into an actual real-world application.
Bill?
One thing I'd like to add in terms of vision as we go forward on the sustainability project is I think it's the wrong image to have the thin film around the planet as this fragile thing, because if it weren't for the iron core magneto, we would not have a magnetic field or Van Allen belts to protect it. And if it weren't for the catastrophe of Thera knocking out you know, the size of the Pacific Ocean into the moon, we wouldn't have the asteroidal protection that the moon plants. So there's an intimate structural coupling. So this division between abiotic and biotic is false. It's a membrane and not a wall. And so this enables us to unite the physical and all the geological and all the others with the living process. So I think vision, as Dr. Maitsumi has said, is really critical.
Hold on to it for now. You can hold on to it for now. Shannon, and thank you, it's a good point. I mean, I think semi-permeable membrane is a really important concept for everybody to understand in today's world. So it happens in many places. Do you ladies want to talk a little bit about an idea you were hatching on stage?
Sure. Understanding that we're on the sustainability train, we're on the journey. We haven't reached the destination, but we're on the journey.
For the lower school, it just seems so obvious for us to start small. And when people throughout this were talking about going out in the community, partly because of our curriculum and partly because of the age of the children, we're constantly outside in the environment. not only using our classrooms environment with our garden and our animals, but also the local environment. You know, we're studying the oceans, we're actually going there. When we do the human shelter piece, we actually go to Long Pond Greenbelt and imagine as if we were walking there. So making them actual stewards of the environment, though, starting even with our 2-year-olds, and they would have jobs on the campus, and that could be part of the buddy program. But while we have the education piece in there, also an action piece with that more written out, so that they are actually stewards of the campus, which, you know, I mean, on the lower school we have quite a beautiful campus with lots that they can do with our gardens, and then of course our local area, the east end of Long Island as well. And then we also had talked about a cultural piece with it as well. Do you want to?
Sure. One of the things that we also were discussing as a lower school was there's a lot that we can do for the environment, but possibly even one of the larger pieces is sustaining people's spirits and sustaining our cultures. And when you're talking about people who have been displaced, whether through natural disasters, political reasons, or just climate change events, they leave everything that they knew behind. And they come to these new places, which are not always very inviting or welcoming and are so different. And it's incredibly important for them to not be able to lose who they are in the process. So part of it is teaching our youngest children on up about the compassion and empathy that we must feel for one another, for our species, for other species, for our planet, for nature, but also an empathy and understanding for other people's cultures and retaining that, because that is truly who we are. And that's what we have to offer other people and the world. So we started to talk about the school's motto, know thyself in order to serve, as an overarching guide where we can highlight the importance of action and compassion, which truly embodies the Ross core values, which we spend an inordinate amount of time discussing the core values on the lower school. It's just something that's so vital to their development and their knowledge. And by raising the students' awareness through a focus on water and culture, we feel like we can we're better able to relate our understanding directly to the drought, the refugee crisis, and other times of need. So one of the things that we do so well here at Ross is storytelling. We are all storytellers, and especially the lower school. I mean, we're always telling stories. And it's through these stories that we can connect to one another, and it's through these stories that we can express our culture and where we are and who we are as a species. And that's what makes us different, is that we can tell these stories, and we can share these symbols with one another, and that's how we can understand each other and see each other. So we do this beautiful project at the lower school, the Beginnings Project, where through performance, the students present the entire spiral from kindergarten through grade 6. And it's just this absolutely magical moment where everything melds together. And it's so organic and so beautiful. And the children and the parental community and us as teachers, we're in our rooms, we're focusing so hard on our individual time period. That it's such a beautiful thing to be able to see the progression and see how it naturally links together. And the process of putting together any performance is, truly a binding experience as well. So we thought, instead of relaying the story of our spiral, perhaps we can relay the story of water and its importance to us as human beings and to our environment. So this performance of understanding, which we've right now are calling Chasing Water, would help to inspire awareness to action and can help to recognize the resilience of the human spirit, because the human spirit is really the essential resource that sustains the hope for ourselves, our environment, and future generations. So that's kind of where we're seeing that as being able to invite the outside community in to see what our youngest children can teach them about compassion and our stories and who we are.
So one of the ideas that has come out of this to go to a practical level as well, and many of the teachers spoke about it today, it's come up in a lot of different arenas, is the idea of needing to do a needs assessment. and finding the right experts that will help us to ask the right questions to determine what our exact focus is. And Gonzalo, we're hoping that you will be one of our conduits to some of that, as well as Dr. Kwazimi and others that are here that can help us determine how do we do a needs assessment so that we can begin to educate ourselves, educate our students to understand what our call to action will exactly be. And I do think that education is a really important focus. It's what we do best at Ross that we need to encompass, but to figure out how do we package education, and I would add innovation together with that, along with human spirit and what that form will take. And I know that you had spoken in a smaller group discussion as well, Gonzalo, about, and I thought it was really critical, the idea of how do we prepare students and others for the sense of disaster education, and looking at that idea and that thread as well as part of this and some of the coursework that you've done and bringing it to another level so that we could experience it to understand how maybe we can help make that more spreadable to other communities and other age groups. So we're looking for partnerships. We're looking for action steps that allow us to engage our students in meaningful research, that they're empowered to be partners alongside us as we take this voyage, so that we can come into December with really firm ideas, so we have an action plan to move forward with. So we don't want to sit back. We know that the call to action is now, and at Ross, when we get ideas, we move pretty fast. So we're ready to start moving at this point. That's where we're at. But I think in summary, I speak on behalf of the entire Ross faculty, associates, administration, that this has been an enlightening week. It's been a week that's allowed us to step back and look at issues from yet another perspective, maybe ideas that we've had before, but with a renewed focus and a renewed interest. And I think that that's a really important part of our Founders Weeks. And to have done it through a multidisciplinary lens has only heightened our sensitivity and the desire to make certain that we are truly giving opportunities to our students to be able to have a toolkit. And I think that's the important word, a toolkit for action. And that comes with a strong basis in knowledge and education, but it also comes with the ability to understand how to move that forward. And to again say something that Matthew and I were talking about today, we don't know what that road is, and that's something we have to accept. But what we can have responsibility for is understanding, and this has been pointed out to us this week, that the education of knowing where we are now and how we got here now gives our students a better opportunity to react to what's coming. And that's what we are focused on doing for this year, and thank you for giving us the time to do that.